Hello everyone, and welcome to your complete and ultimate Silver Wolf guide. Everyone's favorite gamer in Honkai Star Rail is finally getting her rerun in the second half of the 1.5 banners, and considering she is one of the best supports in the game, and likely will be for a very long time, this video is to hopefully guide any current or future Silver Wolf owners on how to roughly build and play her. We'll be breaking down everything from her kit, playstyle, her Lycon recommendations, relic sets and stats, teams, eidolons, and a wrap up at the end in an as condensed manner as possible. Timestamps and chapters are below for you to navigate to. With all of that out of the way, let's get right into the guide.
More enemies. Time for a fight.
First, let's talk about Silver Wolf's kit, which we'll go over with her tracers. Silver Wolf's normal attack is pretty normal, dealing 2 hits of quantum damage with a pretty low multiplier. You might notice that Silver Wolf applies a debuff on the enemy though, but that's related to her talent, which I'll discuss in a bit when I get to it. Silver Wolf's skill is the most important part of a kit, and is why she is such a unique character, so we have a lot to go through. When cast, she'll consume 1 skill point to apply an elemental weakness towards the target enemy. The weakness type applied will be the same as one of the elements within your party. For example, if your team has a wind team member, but the enemy does not have wind weakness, Silver Wolf would then have a chance to apply wind weakness towards the target enemy. Silver Wolf will only ever apply an element that the enemy does not have a weakness towards. Like in this case, my team has imaginary, lightning, and of course, Silver Wolf herself who is quantum. The target enemy has both lightning and imaginary weakness already, so when Silver Wolf uses her skill, she will only ever apply quantum weakness towards the enemy, as that is the only element type from my party that the enemy does not currently have a weakness towards. The element implantation can only occur once per enemy, so if you just recast your skill while the enemy already has a weakness implanted, you'll just be refreshing it with a new implantation. This also means that you cannot implant more than 1 element at a time on one specific enemy. The weakness lasts for 3 of the enemy's turns, so if you planned out your team comps ahead of time or correctly implant the element you want, Silver Wolf can actually be quite skill point positive. However, in the same way, if you do not land the right elements you want and have to keep casting your skill till you land the right one, then that might make Silver Wolf skill point negative. This skill is extremely unique in that it allows your teams to have a chance of weakness breaking enemies even when you don't have the right elements in your party. And because weakness breaking is so important in this game for traditional DPSs, this skill alone positions Silver Wolf as an incredible support that is likely going to remain relevant for a very long time. So you might be thinking, well, what happens if the enemy's weakness are all element types in your party? Well, Silver Wolf would then just randomly apply one of the existing weakness elements onto them. So you can still get her talents bug and all res down from her skill, but you will not get a new element weakness. The weakness type can only be ones that exist in your party. Something else that you might be thinking is, if there are multiple element types that the enemy is not weak towards but exists in your party, then how does Silver Wolf decide what element to implant? The answer is RNG, aka luck. Against Bronya here, my team has Quantum and Wind, neither of which Bronya is weak to. So, Silver Wolf would then have a 50-50 chance of applying either Wind or Quantum towards the enemy. Even if you have 3 Quantum members and 1 Wind member like mine, the odds are always evenly split between the elements that can be implanted. So that's something that's very important to keep in mind. Last thing to mention about this skill, the base chance to implant an element is 85% at trace level 10. Because enemies in MOC can have up to a maximum of 40% effect res, you'll need a specific amount of effect hit rate to guarantee Silver Wolf to implant an element. I'll talk about her EHR needs later in the relics part of the video. Moving on to Silver Wolf's ultimate, User Band.
This combat needs optimizing. This is double speed.
Silver Wolf will deal 380% quantum damage towards a single target while also reducing the enemy's defense by a whopping 45% for 3 of the enemy's turns at trace level 10. It costs 110 energy and deals 90 toughness damage as usual, and considering how often Silver Wolf can cast this ultimate when you use an energy recharge rope, or if you have E1, this also makes Silver Wolf a great candidate for a break effect build, which I'll go over in the relic section. In general, it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 turns for Silver Wolf to get her ultimate back up if you use an energy recharge rope. Because my Silver Wolf is Eidolon 1, I can generally get her ult back up in 1 to 2 turns, but of course this might change depending on whether Silver Wolf gets hit or not, or your relic set used, but this is just to give you a general idea on how often Silver Wolf can use this ult, as its defense shred is pretty important. And then for Silverwolf's talents, this allows her to implant bugs towards the target enemy whenever she attacks them, which you may have noticed when Silverwolf attacks enemies in the clips. The attack reduction bug is not that useful, the speed reduction bug is okay, but the defense reduction bug is definitely the best one for sure. Which bug gets implanted is completely random chance though, so you don't get to choose. Bugs can be implanted with any of Silverwolf's attacks, so her normals, skills, and ultimate all can do so, but this also has the lowest base chance out of everything in her kit at 72% base chance at trace level 10. It will take quite a lot of effect hit rate to guarantee a bug to implant, so treat this talent as a bonus but not a guarantee that it will always land. For her trace priority, I recommend leveling her skill and ultimate relatively evenly to raise their base chance of proccing their effects, but especially her skill, since maxing out this trace will bring down your EHR needs by quite a lot. Obviously, you should also unlock all of her major traces, as well as the EHR ones, which will help alleviate your relic stat requirements a little.
This combat needs optimizing. This is double speed.
Next up, let's go over Silverwolf's Litecoin recommendations. I'll go over them in order of star rarity, but this doesn't necessarily indicate the order of how good they are. I'll throw in a ranking at the end to list them in order of my recommendation. First up, we have Silverwolf's signature Litecoin, the Incessant Rain. Incessant Rain gives a decent amount of effect hit rate at S1 and provides additional crit rate for Silverwolf when the enemy has more than 3 debuffs, which should be pretty easy with her bugs, elemental res down, and defense down. It also amplifies damage towards its target with the Ether Code that has the same 100% base chance to proc as her ultimate death down. As you might already be able to tell though, this light cone is pretty much focused on increasing Silverwolf's damage, which is good for a highly invested Silverwolf, but not nearly as useful for a lower investment one. If you already have a before the tutorial mission starts at S5, I actually don't really recommend pulling this light cone that much. But if you missed out on it or just want to boost your Silverwolf's damage, then this is the obvious light cone to get. The only other 5-star option that is usable on Silverwolf is World Signature, in the name of the world. This increases her effect hit rate and damage towards debuffed enemies once you use her skill, but in general I think this light cone is only okay. If you don't have before the tutorial mission starts or Incessant Rain, but somehow got this from the standard banner, then this is a usable option. For the 4 stars, Silverwolf's very obvious best option is before the tutorial mission starts. This light cone is honestly incredible, increasing her effect hit rate by a whopping 40% at S5, while also refunding 8 energy when you attack enemies with defense down. This will obviously mean that you need to hit an enemy with either a type 2 bug or one that has already been struck by her ultimate to take advantage of, so you cannot always make use of this passive. However, the raw effect hit rate from this light cone actually means that you do not have to run an effect hit rate body, and you can run a more offensive option like crit instead if you can hit your EHR thresholds just from substats. Depending on the setup, this means that it can be a better choice than an S1 Incessant Rain, but this is also dependent on whether you wish to build your Silverwolf as a sub DPS or not, and also if you have her Eidolon 1 or 2. And then lastly, the Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat is your last resort option if you did not obtain any of the previous ones. Its passive is quite decent as it allows you to reduce the enemy's defense even more, but does not provide any effect hit rate or damage, so it does lose out a little bit. So overall, Silverwolf's light cone options aren't like super wide, but considering before the tutorial mission starts is completely free and free to superimpose, and it's so good, she doesn't really need anything else. Unfortunately for those post 1.1 players who did not get this light cone, the other options aside from Incessant Rain do fall behind quite a bit.
This is double speed. So you are afraid of me.
For Silverwolf's stats, these stats will depend on your build type. She has 3 main build types: her standard support build, her E2 DPS build, and her break effect build. Before I go over each build, let me first list out her effect hit rate requirements. In case you don't already know, you need a certain amount of effect hit rate to guarantee Silverwolf lands her debuffs. Her bugs, element implants, and defense shred from her ultimate all have different base chances of landing, so these requirements are for you to guarantee that Silverwolf will always land one of those debuffs. If you do not have enough effect hit rate, then Silverwolf will not guarantee landing her debuff, as shown in this example here, where she cannot implant an element. Here are the numbers. Her ultimate has the highest base chance, so it has the lowest requirement, while her bugs have the lowest base chance, so they have the highest requirement. The most important number to pay attention to though is her skills element implantation, which is 96 to 97% EHR. This is to account for the highest amount of effect res that an enemy can have in Memory of Chaos, which is up to 40%. Having 96% EHR will completely guarantee that Silverwolf always implants an element. Of course, this means that you are not guaranteed to land her bugs, but like I said previously, her bugs are much less of a priority, and once you hit 96% EHR, you can start allocating other offensive stats like crit into your build. These numbers are for E0 and E1 Silverwolves only, and for those of you who are E2, y'all have much lower lower requirements, which I'll throw up on the screen now. Because your effect hit rate needs are so low, you can opt for a full DPS build on Silverwolf while still being able to guarantee her element implantation. Okay, for her actual builds, her standard support build will generally use an effect hit rate body, speed boots, quantum damage sphere, and an energy recharge link rope. If you use the before the tutorial mission starts light cone, you'll be overcapped on your EHR, in which case you can swap to a crit body if you already have enough EHR in your substats. Speed boots is no debate. There is never a situation where you should run any other boots on Silverwolf, and she should always go faster than your team's DPS because that allows her to be skill point positive. Her debuffs are based on the enemy's turns and not her own, so there's no downside of having her go as fast as possible. For her link rope, I generally recommend an ER1 for ultimate uptime, even at E1. This will make her do less damage than an attack percent link rope, but I think casting her ultimate often is much more important than her damage, especially if you're facing more than one enemy, which happens a lot. For those of you who are E2 and above, the build is similar, but your body should always be crit rate. Your EHR needs are low enough where there should be no reason to run an EHR body, and if you are E6, you should also run an attack percent sphere instead, since she'll gain so much damage bonus from her E4 and E6, making a quantum damage sphere not as useful. And then lastly, we have the most unique build option, which is her break effect build. Because Silverwolf generally should be one of the faster members in your team, while also being able to implant quantum on enemies, she has a very good chance of being able to weakness break the enemy. So why would you go for a break effect build? Well, this build is really good for lower investment Silverwolf players to still allow her to deal good damage and delay the enemy's action by a lot more than normal. As you can see in the clip examples, Silverwolf delays the enemy's action by a lot. At the same time, it also allows her to deal a lot more damage without the need for a crit build that is much harder to farm for. This build is thus really good for those who are not investing much into Silverwolf, since it's really easy to build. However, I should also mention that this build will eventually get outclassed by good crit builds, which are both more flexible and also not contingent on Silverwolf being the one to weakness break the enemy, as that's not viable in every single scenario. For her break effect build, her body should be effect hit rate, her boots should still be speed as usual, her link rope should obviously be break effect, and then her sphere can literally be anything, including HP percent, defense percent, quantum damage, literally anything. With this build, I also highly recommend using the before the tutorial mission starts light cone due to the energy refund which you really need, since her ultimate uptime becomes much more important in this build. For Silverwolf's relic sets, her 4-piece options are very straightforward. Unsurprisingly, her best in slot is going to be the 4-piece Genius of Brilliant Stars. This boosts Silverwolf's damage on all fronts, and considering her ultimate damage multiplier is pretty good, there is little reason to not opt for this set. However, this set may not be as beneficial if your Silverwolf is not as highly invested, as this set really favors a Silverwolf that is well built with decent crit stats along with being able to hit her speed thresholds. As such, the alternative would be the 4-piece Musketeers. This is a set that everyone has and is good because it allows lower invested players to hit Silverwolf's speed thresholds, since you usually want her to be going as fast as possible. I recommend this set if you're at a lower level or simply do not have a good 4-piece Genius on hand. And then for those people playing break effect Silverwolf, you should opt for the Thief of Shooting Meteor. This will increase your break damage even further, while also regenerating energy when doing so. However, this has the same issue as the typical break effect build, being that it is contingent on Silverwolf being the one to do the weakness breaking on the enemy, which may or may not always be viable, and thus isn't super flexible. For your planar ornaments, Silverwolf can use a fairly large variety due to her being both a support and sub DPS. First up, all of these support sets can obviously be used on her, such as the Fleet of the Ageless, Broken Keel, and Sprightly Von Whack. Fleet of the Ageless and Broken Keel both increase the allies' damage, which is obviously good for a support to do, though keep in mind that for Broken Keel, it may be a little hard to allocate that much effect res in Silverwolf substats, especially if you need to focus on your EHR, crit, and speed. Von Whack helps the ultimate uptime by a bit, but if you have E1 Silverwolf or have decently built speed, this set is honestly only okay and I wouldn't generally recommend this. Pikani is also a usable set, but only if you play with a quantum DPS, of which there really only are Zila and Ting-Che. For this reason, I do think Pikani is a bit restrictive. So those were your support sets. Moving on to her DPS sets, we have two main options. Firstly, and this is the option I use, we have the Inert Salsado. This increases crit rate, but more importantly, increases ultimate damage, which is pretty much where all of Silverwolf's damage is coming from. The only caveat is that this set does have a 50% crit rate requirement, which may be difficult to hit purely from substats at E0 or E1. However, if you have her at E2, or use the before the tutorial mission starts light cone, and thus use a crit body, then it should be pretty easy to hit 50% crit rate, and thus this becomes the best option. And then finally, we have the Pan-Galactic set, which increases Silverwolf's attack scaling off her EHR. I really only recommend this set for E0 and E1 Silverwolves, as at E2 and above, you won't be building that much EHR for this to be very useful.
This is double speed.
Silverwolf's teams are far and wide because she is a team enabler herself. She can be fit into any team that has a free support slot and is particularly useful in scenarios where your team does not have an element that the enemy is weak towards. First up, we have the mono quantum teams, with your main DPS being Zila or Ting-Chue, your sustains being Fu Xuan or Lynx, and then Silverwolf. I also use Bronya with my Zila, which does mean that this isn't a true mono quantum and does cause situations where Silverwolf implants wind instead if the enemy is not weak to both quantum or wind. But this is my favorite team to play with Zila, as it allows me to bring Zila in fights against enemies that aren't quantum weak, while also letting her do much more damage against the enemy. Then we have pretty much any other team. For me, my general everyday team is this one, consisting of Imbibitor Lune, Tingyun, Silverwolf, and then Luo Cha. Again, this team just allows me to weakness break enemies that aren't imaginary weak, no different from the mono team before. There isn't a cut and dry team that Silverwolf is bad in because she's such an excellent unit. Even discounting her element implantation, her role as a debuffer is unmatched, seconded only by Pella, who is only better in AoE scenarios. The only teams that might not benefit Silverwolf are those that can't afford another support slot, or those dot focus ones like Kafka teams. Silverwolf is an excellent team enabler and will likely fit into any team that has a traditional DPS.
This is double speed.
Alright, let's just breeze through Silverwolf's Eidolons for those of you who have money to burn. Eidolon 1 allows Silverwolf to regenerate up to 35 energy when you use her ultimate on a debuffed enemy. Having this opens you up to running an attack percent link rope for more damage, or alternatively, you can still run an energy recharge link rope and get 2-turn ultimates, which is mainly handy in multi-target scenarios. E2 reduces the effect res of all enemies by 20%, which lowers your EHR needs by a significant amount and thus allows her to have a more offensive-oriented build. This is Silverwolf's most important Eidolon for enabling her to be a much bigger damage dealer, as it completely switches up her build. Eidolon 3 and 5 are trace levels as usual. Eidolon 4 gives her more damage to her ultimate, and Eidolon 6 gives even more damage to her ultimate. So as you can tell, aside from E1, which is a utility constellation, the rest of them are all damage constellations. I'd say her E1 and E2 are really good value Eidolons, and the rest are not really necessary. I would also prioritize her E2 over her signature light cone for most players, unless you don't have the before the tutorial mission starts light cone.
Combat needs optim. This is double speed.
So yes, Silverwolf is an incredible character. She is the biggest debuffer in the game, with an incredibly unique mechanic of enabling teams to weakness break even without the correct elements. Because weakness breaking is such an important part of the game, Silverwolf is unlikely going to be replaced and will remain relevant to the game for a very, very long time. For new players especially, Silverwolf will be a godsend when you don't have as many characters or as good builds yet. She is a top tier support alongside Bronya and Tingyun, and I highly recommend anyone to pull her if you don't already have her and are looking to improve your account. In any case, that has been my Silverwolf guide. I hope this was useful, and I wish everyone the best of luck pulling her. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Take care.